So in last Sunday's Neville Goddard conversation, we discussed thought transmission and telepathy. And we all have it. We all use it regularly, whether we are conscious of it or not. And we can consciously use it if we'd like. Now, there was a number of questions on what technique I used to manifest that text message from my friend who I didn't speak with for a few years. So let's start with that today. I followed Neville's instructions where he states, construct an event you believe you will encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. Then mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action until the single sensation of fulfillment dominates the mind, imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action here and now, so that you experience in imagination what you would experience in the flesh were you now to realize your goal. He says, experience has convinced me that this is the easiest way to achieve our goal. Well, I would agree with him, as any form of self-suggestion that implies it's done works because, like with all that we have discussed over the years, once you shift inside to reality being a certain way, then it is that way for you, and it plays out that way for you. So in this case, I imagine seeing my phone with a notification of a message from them, which would be what I would encounter following the fulfillment of my desire. Now, the second part here, immobilize the body. Let's discuss this further, as I didn't do this with this particular imaginal act. What I did that time was, as he says, mentally feel myself right into the proposed action until the single sensation of fulfillment dominated mine, imagining all the while that I am actually performing the action here and now, so that I experience in imagination what I would experience in the flesh were I now to realize my goal. So the first part, immobilize the physical body and induce a state of consciousness akin to sleep. I do apply state akin to sleep with his revision process, if applicable, before I go to sleep, which we will talk about later. However, the instance with the text, I find that as we continue to apply this information and prove it in equation again and again to ourselves, we listen to ourselves and trust ourselves. We realize that reality is more moldable than perhaps it might have once appeared. We then know clearly how the law works and can suggest something to ourselves and accept it right then and there, going on with our day. I actually forgot about the imaginal act, and it happened. And when it did happen, I remembered the imaginal act. This is what it's all about. Suggesting something to yourself and accepting your own suggestions. Like, that's the way it is. And like with anything, the moment you say, that is the way you believe it is, we no longer think about it in any opposing manner, because that would not make any sense to think from any other opposing way. Now, state akin to sleep, if you're not familiar with it, is also referred to in psychology as hypnagogic state, and is a transition from wakefulness to sleep where your conscious mind is still there, just enough where you can hold an imaginal scene in your mind, which you can imagine in a loop, or you can make your own autosuggestions, which you can record and play in loop during state akin to sleep, where there is no overthinking, self-doubt, and we accept the suggestions. And since consciousness is one, the message gets transmitted to the other, as he says here. The subconscious transmits ideas from mind to mind through telepathy. So we accept into the subconscious easily in a state akin to sleep. And since consciousness is one, it's all interconnected with everything. All beings and all things are connected by your subconscious mind, as he says here. Consciousness includes a subconscious as well as a conscious part. The infinitely greater part of consciousness lies below the sphere of objective consciousness. There's no one that is not all that is, for consciousness, though expressed in an infinite series of levels, is not divisional. There is no real separation or gap in consciousness. So we're speaking metaphysics here. The subconscious makes it happen. We consciously suggest to ourselves and accept the suggestion, and then there is no desire to worry and overthink of how it happens because you fulfilled it in imagination. Worrying would not make any sense because you accepted reality being a certain way, and there is thus no internal conflict. Now, if we only think of ourselves and others as only physical bodies separated by distance or space, we might forget that there's no gap actually in consciousness. You and I, at the core, are the same. We may only appear differently and relate to each other differently via the five senses for our human life experience by how you believe reality to work and how you believe you relate with others. And since all of this is interconnected via the subconscious, we speak to ourselves inwardly, think feelingly, from the end result, as if it is already so in imagination, and accept that suggestion into the subconscious, and then some way, somehow, they call us back. So if you imagine others in a specific or a generally loving way, for example, they show up that way. So in a state akin to sleep, we find it is easy to stop overthinking. Perhaps stories of one does not deserve to be loved or have what they desire. Those are past beliefs, and we discussed in Thursday's video. They only have power if we give them power. So in a state akin to sleep, we release those beliefs, and if they seem to cause overthinking or emotional turmoil during the day, we'll discuss how we can release them with revision later on. So state akin to sleep is not the only way to imagine and accept a suggestion. We could do it in waking hours as well. I find it easier while in flow state. Beta brainwave state is more thinking and overthinking. Alpha is flowing, and theta, which is state akin to sleep, borders alpha theta. So the way I do it, for example, is when I work with others. I let my mind go blank now and then, and I may suggest as applicable and may suggest one word or a few words like, they are their ideal now, or everything works out. And I notice that the conversations change. They change on their own. I will actually see in front of my own eyes that they initially started talking from identification to an undesirable state, and all of a sudden they start talking from their ideal in a way that appears they have self-persuaded themselves that they have found the solution. That is because people mirror our thoughts. And if I see them as ideal, then what problem could exist? We have a telepathic connection as consciousness is one. Ideas or solutions for challenges pop up in their mind, and they accept the suggestions and start to speak from the end. When this first started happening, it was a bit unusual for me. But now it's become normal because we know the creative power works and always worked upon connecting the dots looking backward. I change how I see them. People think and feel what we think and feel about them. Of course, if you imagine them ideally, they would yield instantly to that imaginal act. Who doesn't want others to see them ideally? So we remain faithful to it, and they reflect the change. Ideal now, or the magic word, ideal. If they say they're not good enough, in my mind, it means they are good enough. If they say they don't have enough time to accomplish their vision, in my mind, they have plenty of time. If they say they're not smart enough, in my mind, they're smart enough. If they say they're not talented enough, in my mind, they are talented now. If they say they're not a great leader, in my mind, they are a great leader now. If they say they don't have enough experience, in my mind, they have the experience now. If they say they'll never be successful, in my mind, they are successful now. Here's the thing, I'm not going to argue with them, convince them. No one to change but self. It's what within me is causing this undesirable experience to appear, and I change it inside. Then the conversation changes. Again, this is not new to you. You've done this before, recall. You've done it many times, and acknowledge that it's now easier for you to do this. So am I really changing them? Actually, I'm changing myself. They reflect what I am thinking because I put off the former conversation. we let them be and we change it inside. It's all throughout Scripture, and for good reason. Because it works, it's done for you. This is not about force or controlling others, as he says here. You do not have to be concerned about influencing others. They are not the cause. Your imaginal act is. Everyone is yourself pushed out, so when you imagine, you are influencing yourself. Now, to what extent is this true? Well, we'll keep doing it every day. Let's see how far it goes. Why not? Actually, Neville said, I think it was on the lecture, I was listening to it on YouTube called Pure of Heart. He said, then what must I do? Use the talent that was given to bring about radical changes in the outer aspects of life, or something like that. So now when it comes to thought transmission, we do it all the time. In a specific level, as mentioned with the text message, and also a more generic level. For example, if someone is in an ideal state of mind and notice others around them behaving in the same way, others treating them as a reflection, they may also notice people that they never met before who are in that state show up all of a sudden. There's no one to change but self. And so we suggest to ourselves how reality is, and then it happens that way. Even if a person doesn't believe it, if they suggest it to themselves often, a few times, or even once with enough conviction, they will end up believing it. And again, this is not a new thing. How do we think we got these beliefs about ourselves, about others, how reality works, and how we relate to others anyways? By accepting suggestions. This is why whenever I consume any information on relationships, I am aware of what I'm suggesting to myself in relation to the information. Back in the days, we might have been consuming information about relationships and blindly accepting suggestions without any discernment. And all those beliefs change with revisions. So let's discuss how, which we'll go through his process, and we'll discuss my experiences in relation to. So he says, instead of trying to change others through argument and force, let me but ascend in consciousness to a higher level, and I will automatically change others by changing myself. There is no one to change but self. The self is simply your awareness, your consciousness, and the world in which it lives is determined by the concept you hold of yourself. It is to consciousness that we must turn as to the only reality. So with revision, we have an opportunity to review our day before going to sleep and rewrite how it happens in our imagination. And since we do this before going to sleep, we are more suggestible. Our subconscious mind is open to suggestion, and these acts initiate the change like any other method for accepting your suggestions. He says, prune your imagination by withdrawing your attention from all unlovely and destructive ideas and concentrating on the ideal you wish to attain. And so here are the steps. Number 1, he says, at the end of the day, I review my day. I don't judge it, I simply review it. I look over the entire day, all the episodes, all the events, all the conversations, all the meetings. So you can do this with your entire day if you'd like. I do it with certain experiences during the day, any that I would not consider to be ideal. Those are the ones I recall. If you have a journal or took notes during the day of the experiences to revise, then that could be very helpful. I apply this for experiences that I would not consider to be ideal, and you decide what ideal means to you. Now this part here, I don't judge. It means bringing it to the forefront without shaming or condemning yourself or the person or event in question. Next he says, and then I see it clearly in my mind's eye. I rewrite it. I rewrite it and make it conform to the ideal day I wish I had experienced. I take scene after scene and rewrite it, revise it, and having revised my day, then in my imagination I relive that day, the revised day, and I do it over and over in my imagination until the seeming imagined state begins to take on to me the tones of reality. So I reimagine the events in a way that I would consider to be ideal. For example, let's say I went to a cafe and a person serving me was not being what I would consider to be friendly. I would imagine a scene once or a few times in a way that I would consider the experience to have played out ideally, and again, whatever ideal means to you. So in state akin to sleep, we release any identification of how we believe it should be from our past beliefs or undesirable suggestion and accept the scene that you want. This is your world, and you have all the power to create it the way you want. You'll see the changes occur, so you might as well create it exactly the way you want. Why does one have to settle in this world when they already have everything inside? They are complete inside. They can select what they want from the infinite within, the kingdom of heaven within, and see it clearly as to how they want it to be in imagination. Romans 12:2. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So what you imagine will be taken here and externalized for you. He says, it seems that it's real, that I actually did experience it, and I have found from experience that these revised days, if really lived, will change my tomorrows. So by imagining the ideal scene once or again and again if applicable, you are satisfied and you feel at peace with the imaginal scene that it went ideally the way, and you're done. That is the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Like, that's the way it is. This is how we relate with each other. You no longer feel any resentment or whatever was felt from prior to the revision with that person. He says, when I meet someone tomorrow that today disappointed me, they will not tomorrow, for in me I have changed the very nature of that being. And having changed him, he bears witness tomorrow of the change that took place within me. So when you encounter them the next day or whenever, they actually are experienced how you experience them in your imagination. He says, it is my duty to take this garden and make it a garden by daily using the pruning shears of revision. So we've been given two gifts, as stated in the Hermetica, mind and speech. And the garden of your mind can be kept in a way you like, and speech being the image of mind, said Hermes. You rewrite the story in your mind in a way that you would consider to be ideal, and then you'll notice it in your relationships with them. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You could say, people show up in the exact same way I imagine them, for all minds are one mind, accessed in imagination and play out of how I imagine it to be. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report. I imagine on these things as already so, thinking feelingly from this premise into harmonious relationships with others, remaining in my ideal state of being wherever I go, and everyone shows up in harmony accordingly as others reflect my ideal state of mind, as all are an expression of what I form in my imagination in mutual love and harmony with all. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.